Can you tell me about what led to Father Befouled coming into existence?
Yeah. So I had a black metal project. I mean, I love black metal as well. There was a time, 2002, 2003, when that was all I listened to. I was just obsessed with black metal. And I had a black metal project back then that ended around 2007. So they overlapped a little bit, but I was playing guitar and listening to more death metal at the time, around 2005, 2006. And I had written a couple of riffs, and I was like, I kind of want to do a death metal thing. And I had a friend that back then I used to write for this metal website, and my friend Jason, he owned the website and was the editor of it. And he was an accomplished musician. And I said, I want to start this death metal thing. Would you be interested in doing it with me? And he said, yeah, sure, absolutely. And I lived in Georgia and he lived in Illinois. So I would write riffs and write songs, and I would send them to him, and he would kind of dissect them and figure them out. And then he would program drums that would fit them. And he sent me the drum tracks back, and then I would re-record final guitars to the drum tracks. And that's how we created our first. It was going to be a demo and it ended up becoming the Profano Ad Regnum EP. But it was just born out of I want to write death metal. And when I started writing, the riffs came out darker. They came out more dissonant and more angular, not as straightforward as like a Cannibal Corpse or a Deicide. And at the time, I love telling this story, I didn't listen to Incantation. I saw Incantation in 2000, and I honestly wasn't that into them. I went to see them with Nile, Mortician, Malignancy, and I was really going for Mortician because Mortician is one of my absolute favorite bands of all time. And Malignancy was there, and I really, really liked Malignancy. I liked how technical and brutal they were, and they're now 22 years later, I love Malignancy. But I watched Incantation that night, and I was like, I don't really get it. It was lumbering and not straightforward and ethereal sounding, and I enjoyed it, but it just wasn't for me that night. So then jump to 6 years later, I'm writing Father Befouled songs, and Jason, who was the other original member, he said, I'm hearing some Incantation in your riffs. I was like, well, I've never really listened to them much other than seeing them one time. And in high school, a buddy of mine had an Incantation CD, and we couldn't make heads or tails of what was coming out of the speakers. And it was funny. I remember the day we went to this little used CD store in our town we grew up in, and he bought Upon the Throne of Apocalypse, which turned out to be it's a rare CD. And the first song is Abolishment of Immaculate Serenity, which is the closing song of Mortal Throat of Nazarene. And it's this 8-minute doom epic. So as it starts, and it never picks up. And I'm like, is this what Incantation sounds like? Or are they just this like slow doom band? And that was my only memory of them, is how just dreary and doomy they sounded. So jump to 2006, I'm writing these songs, and Jason says, I'm hearing a lot of Incantation. I said, well, I'm not really an Incantation fan, but I'll check them out. So then I listened to probably the first 3 albums the most, and I was just obsessed. I was like, holy shit, this is exactly what I want to do. This is what I'm hearing in my head when I'm writing. This is the kind of death metal I want to write. It comes from a different place. It sounds hellish, and it sounds nightmarish, and it sounds like you're just drowning in a maelstrom. And so, yeah, the Incantation obsession started then. Now, 16, 17 years later, they're one of my absolute favorite bands. They're friends of mine. It's crazy how things can come full circle like that. But it just, the band started because I wanted to do something different. I've been playing this black metal project for a couple of years, and I had done some records and some splits, and it was this one-man black metal thing, and I had just it had ran its course with what I wanted to accomplish. And I said, I was listening to more death metal. I was revisiting stuff that I liked in the 90s. And it just became me writing these dark songs. And then someone saying, hey, that sounds like incantation, and me listening to incantation and becoming obsessed with incantation. And we've just gone from there. And, luckily someone heard it. We had a MySpace page back then, and people heard it and liked it. We got it in front of the right ears. I never expected Father Befouled to be a quote unquote band. I never thought it would be more than just a project, me and Jason making a demo. And now here we are 17 years later. So 16 years later. That shit blows my mind hearing myself say that.
And how did that evolution come about? What led Father Befouled to evolve from a project between you and Jason and programmed drums to a full band?
So I owe a lot of that to Alex Macias from the band Thornspawn. Alex reached out to me in 2007, and he said, I do this festival in Texas every year called Sacrifice of the Nazarene Child, which I was familiar with. My favorite black metal band of all time is Judas Iscariot. And the first of 2 shows that band ever played, the first one was at the Sacrifice of Nazarene Child Fest in 99 or 2000. So I was familiar with it. I had watched the footage of that show so many times. So Alex reached out to me. He just randomly came across the Father Befouled MySpace page and liked our music. And he said, would you like to come play our fest? And this was like 10 months out. And I said, well, shit. I mean, if I can put together a band, yeah. And me and him started talking, and we became buddies. And so Jason lived in Chicago. I lived in Georgia. And then Derek at the time was this kid that I knew in town that worked at the guitar shop that we all went to. And he was into metal. And I said, would you want to play guitar with us? And he said, yeah. So he started, I started teaching him the songs, and we tried to find a live drummer for those 10 months. And it wasn't happening. So I said, Jason, how about we just take the drum tracks and just play them through the PA and play along to it? So that's what we did. Jason flew down, and he came down a few days ahead of time, and we rehearsed together playing the drum tracks through a PA system in my garage. And we got the set down, and then we all drove to Texas, and we played this fest, and we had a fucking blast. It was at that fest that I met this kid named Mike. And Mike was mutual friends with some friends of mine that were there. And he lived in Cleveland. And he said, well, I'm a drummer. He's like, I'd love to try to drum for you. I said, well, let's try it. So we hooked back up, communicated after that, after we'd all gotten home. And I sent him some of the songs. I said, here, record yourself playing the songs. See if you can figure it out. And he sent me back the drum tracks, and we started playing along to them. And we just went from there, and we would collaborate. I would write songs and send them to him. And I want to say that what I would do is I would write songs and I would program the drums out. Let me jump back. So in the time leading up to that first show, we had recorded the Profano ad Regnum material, and a label out of Spain was going to put it out, and it fell through. And then I got contacted by Enucleation Records, which was a label out of Pennsylvania. And I want to say that they just randomly found us. The guy's name was Greg that ran that label. And he said, I'd love to put this out for you. So we agreed to do that. And then Gas Mask Productions was a label out of France. And they had worked with Thornspawn. And that's how I got hooked up with them. Because I think Alex put our music in front of, his name was Pierre. And Pierre said, I'd love to do an album for you. So in the months leading up to that festival, I wrote the first album. And Jason had kind of taken a back seat at that point. And I started programming the drums. But basically, he came to my house. He flew down for a week. And we put all the software on my computer, and he taught me the basics of programming drums. And I wrote that record and programmed all of the drums and played all of the bass guitar. And that was the Obscurus Ex Cultus record. And Gas Mask put it out on CD. And neither that or Profano had come out by the time we played the fest. So what I did was I took some rehearsal materials, some like unmastered, unmixed tracks, a couple of live rehearsal tracks, and maybe one unreleased song. And I put together the Sacrificing Oblivion demo. And that became the first physical release we ever made. And we made like 25 copies at my house and took them with us to the fest and sold them there. I don't even have one now. And then shortly thereafter, the first record came out and the Profano Ad Regnum EP came out. Then we met Mike, started collaborating, and we had agreed to do the split with Helcaraxa. So the first show we ever played, that fest, was in June of 2008. In October of 2008, we went to New Jersey to play a festival. And that came about because we had met the band Pro Sanctus and Fairy in Texas. We had been Facebook friends, and then we both played that fest in Texas. We kept talking, and Jake, the main person from Pro Sanctus, became our bass player, and he lived in Ohio as well. So him and Mike were near each other in Ohio, and me and Derek were in Georgia, and Jason bowed out. Jason was considerably older than us too. We were all like, I was in my late 20s, and Jason was already 40 at that point, or almost 40, because he's almost 50 now. But so Pro Sanctus had gotten this fest gig in New Jersey, and I reached out to the organizer, and I said, hey, I'd love to play that as well. And he said, let's do it. So we started collaborating with Mike and sending him the songs to learn, the set to learn, sending the stuff to Jake for Jake to learn the set. And then what we did is me and Derek drove from Georgia to Ohio, and we spent 3 or 4 days rehearsing at Mike's house. Oh, Jason was still in the band because Jason played that second set. So Jake hadn't joined yet. So Jason flew over from Chicago to Cleveland, and me and Derek drove to Cleveland. This was in October of 2008. And we rehearsed. I remember we rehearsed in Mike's basement and worked the set out, and then drove to New Jersey and played the fest. And it was awesome. And then we all went home. And we did the split with Decrepitaph, that was the first song that Mike ever recorded for us. And what it was is I wrote it, programmed out the like kind of rough drums to it, sent it to Mike. He learned it, recorded the drums, learned his own spin on it, sent it back to me. We recorded the final stuff, and then I pressed that split on my label. And then Jason bowed out, and I asked Jake to join. And then when we were in New Jersey at that fest, I met Jesse from Helcaraxa. And Jesse was also in contact with Greg from Enucleation Records. And we decided we wanted to do a split together. So collaborated with Mike. He learned all the new songs I had written. We did 5 new songs for that. And he recorded them and sent them back to me. I recorded my parts. We sent it all to Jake. Jake recorded the bass parts. And then Enucleation Records put it out. We did 2 releases with them. We did that split, and we did that first EP. And then we did a 7-inch on Nuclear War Now. And leading up, so Greg had Enucleation. He ran Enucleation Records, but his day job, he worked for Relapse Records. And so that's how we got in with Relapse. And Greg had gotten this deal with Relapse to be part of a 7-inch series. They wanted to do a 7-inch series of death metal bands kind of playing old sounding death, because that was really starting to see a resurgence then. That's when that old school death metal resurgence started around 2008, 2009. And Greg got us this gig at Relapse on the 7-inch series. It was going to be like 5, 7 inches, 10 bands, something like that, 12 bands, 6, 7 inches, something like that. And we recorded a song for it, and it never came out. Relapse ended up abandoning the project. So Greg at Enucleation was going to put out our second record, which we had started roughly working on. We had also agreed to do the 7-inch for Nuclear War Now. I'm a graphic designer, and I had worked with Nuclear War Now doing graphic design for them starting back in like 2007 or 2008. And he said, I'll put out a 7-inch for you. So we started doing that. We were working on that in the summer of 2009. And then I remember we went and played a show in Texas in 2009 because it was 1 year to the day since our first show we had ever played. And we played a show in Texas with our full lineup, which was me, Derek, Jake, and Mike. And then while we were there in Texas, we stayed with Wayne from Decrepitaph at his house for the week. We recorded the drum tracks for the Nuclear War Now 7-inch because he had a full recording set up at his house. Well, we got back home and I started listening to the files, and they were corrupted. Like one of the microphones had fucked up, and we didn't have any crashes, any cymbals in the recording or something, so they weren't usable. While that was going on, Greg at Enucleation decided to close his label. But he said, I've worked out a deal for you. Relapse wants to put out this record for you. The 7-inch series had fallen apart. Enucleation closed, but he said, Relapse wants to work with you. So that's how we hooked up with Relapse to do the Morbid Destitution of Covenant record. So we were working on that. We were going to have to re-record the Rotting Godless Throne 7-inch. And this was summer of 2009. And as all that is working, the fall of 2009 in November, Mike killed himself, our drummer. So we were left with this deal with Relapse, the 7-inch on Nuclear War Now, and all of a sudden we don't have a drummer. So people really stepped up at that point. Chad Davis from Hour of 13, I was friends with. We had played a show in Nashville, Tennessee in April of 2009. And I met Chad there. He was playing in another band, and we had stayed in contact. So then he said, I'd love to play drums with you, even if it's just me doing it, helping you out for this 7-inch. So sent him the first song, which was the Rotting Godless Throne song. And he learned it and recorded it and sent me the drums back, and we recorded it. And then he wasn't able to do any more. He had this window that he could help us in, and then it closed. So then I had been trying to get Wayne to play with us from Decrepitaph. So I said, Wayne, I really, really need you to play on this 7-inch. So he learned the other song I had written and recorded it. Well, we had always planned on doing a Profanatica cover, and that was Mike's favorite band, was Profanatica. So we had met Profanatica. We had played with them twice at this point. We played with them in Texas, and we played with them in New Jersey, so we had been in contact. And I remember I was at Mike's funeral. Me and my wife drove up to Ohio for Mike's funeral. And while I'm at the funeral, Paul Ledney from Profanatica called me, and we were talking. And he said he was going to try to come, and he couldn't make it, but he wanted to call and offer condolences and see how we were doing. And I mentioned, that we were going to record this Profanatica cover, and we got to talking, and he said that he would play the drums on it as a tribute for Mike. So he recorded the drums for the Weeping in Heaven cover we did on our 7-inch, which was really cool to have the person who wrote the song play the drums on the cover for us. So that came out. Then I convinced Wayne to stay in the band, and we wrote the Relapse album. I remember I wrote it, and then we went to Texas. Jake flew down from Ohio, and Derek and I drove out there. And we spent a week at Wayne's house, me teaching them the songs, rehearsing it, and then recording it all in 5 days. And then we, had it mixed and mastered and sent off to Relapse. And that was like the break. That was when we really got in front of people, when we put out that second record on Relapse Records. So, and by that point, that record came out in September of 2010. So it was a full year almost after Mike had died, because he died November the 1st, 2009. And then that record came out in September. We recorded it in May of 10, and it came out in September of 10. So that's kind of the impetus of the band the first couple of years. So
during the very earliest part of the process, when you guys were still playing live but with programmed drums, were you getting any kind of pushback? Because death metal fans can be a little bit weird when it comes to...
We only did that once.
Okay.
We only did it that first show, and we had no pushback. That show was packed. We played, it was a fest. There was a bunch of bands. We played at like 5:00 in the afternoon, but packed room. People loved it. Nobody said a word. I took my laptop and plugged my laptop into the PA, and we blasted the drums, and we played a fucking raging death metal set. I thought it was fucking amazing. Never had any pushback. But luckily, by the time we played our second show, which was the other fest in New Jersey, Mike had come along. So from June of 2008 until October of 2008, that summer is when we brought Mike in, and Mike learned the set. So we only had to do it once.